is called to order. Building board, November 14th, 2018. It is 5:34. Roll call.
Mr. Steele?
Here.
Mr. Fedin?
Here.
Mr. Hickle?
Here.
Mr. McCann?
Here.
Mr. Soboleski?
Here.
Mr. Feller?
Here.
Mr. Field has notified us that he will not be here. Mr. Logan?
Here.
And Mr. Boney is out at the moment. And we have a quorum, 7 board members. And for staff, Mr. Nossinger,
Here.
Mr. Burgoyne,
Here.
and Mr. Klossberg is on his way.
Thanks for all being here on time, being here. Approval of tonight's agenda.
Mr. Chair, I move for approval of the agenda as published.
I'll second. Mr. Ferdine. Agenda approved. Approval or any, well, discussion of any of last meeting's minutes.
To approve? Second.
6:19. On to the business. 3 items. So we'll let you vote in the local amendments.
Or rearrange those until they can get. It's just a
Great
few
idea.
minutes.
You just have to set.
See, so platform lifts and stairway chair lifts, local amendments.
Understand, and I'll let you speak to this because should be like in here.
Clarifications and definitions.
And nothing that's gonna cost the industry more money, save the industry money. It's just kind of running them.
Mostly clarifications.
Question is, we're starting to read it. Like, I was noting that for the platform lifts A18-1 in the regulatory section of the IBC, it's referencing only a couple of sections in 2000. I know the codes are out the same. If that was anything else.
Yeah. Paying attention and create an amendment to update the reference standards. That's a good approach.
The AEP plan references the current codes in effect. That is everything else.
Do we, for everybody, but staff, do you see a lot of stairway chair lifts still coming through?
About 3 or 4 a week.
No kidding.
Yes.
Wow.
For residential,
Commercial or residential applications?
Stairway chair lifts, 90+% of them, private residents that see the installation of them. That's the few that enter in public spaces, we see them every 2 years.
So a stairway chairlift doesn't qualify as any sort of accessible route. So residential building, you're not gaining anything by putting it in. You would need a platform lift or an elevator to have a code compliant accessible route.
It's a nice thing to do, but it's not a required, it's an ancillary.
Yeah, so they use them in single family homes as a way to get up and down the stairs.
Yep.
So question if I might. Right now, what we're dealing with tonight is hearing the process or what's before. We'll then either vote in support of or make changes, and then this will be moved on to the assembly. Out of the cycle, or will it be held back until all the codes?
Yeah, we're so far ahead of the other codes that I plan to move these on to the assembly. Grouped together as you're seeing them tonight. And they're currently with legal, undergoing the Municipality of Anchorage legal review.
And so, to follow up on that, the process was internal review.
Committee involving Eric and Scott Boney, as well as representatives from the respective industries.
Okay.
Their input.
To note, Mr. Callen arrived at 5.
Sorry.
Beat me from the last one.
There's changes here.
Okay, thank you. I need to catch my breath before I think.
Respective comments on business. Just a comment.
No, I'm just pretty much gonna trust that the guy cooking my food at the restaurant's safe. I think these guys handle something that simple.
Okay, let's move on to elevator and escalator code.
And to note, Mr. Sterling Strait arrived at 5:43.
So on the elevator, escalator, is there another distance being just what was the committee?
It was the same committee composition,
Okay.
directly from one to the next one. Proceed.
Through these, but a lot of these definitions say back. It's, I can't take a lot from it, so that's, I would probably comment the same as Ray. Trust you guys to make some good
As
decisions.
Eric can testify, there was a lot of discussion and dealing with, even down to the comma level.
Yeah, it was very thorough, I can say that. It was months that I mean, literally, it's the most thorough process I've ever been through.
So was there anything controversial that you wanted the rest of the board to weigh in on?
The only thing that was controversial that I can think of was the sump pump.
The sump pump issue, which ended up remaining as
As is.
existing policy.
Yeah. We looked at improving, changing the sump pump that the muni has a process that, it's actually required to be roughed in, right? That helps.
The policy is under certain building conditions. A wet pit, for one thing, requires a sump pump. Second, if it's a hydraulic elevator, it has to have an environmental protection piece, which can be an oil water separator or other approved means. If it is greater than 4 stories, then it has to have a sump pump, and by the drafted actual original code, it has to have a sump pump discharging water 750 gallons, I'm sorry, 75 gallons a minute, 1,000 gallons an hour. That's where the policy and where our practice has been for the last several years. We tried to clean it up some, but could not get a consensus, so we left it as is.
I think taking just one step back, our local amendment actually relaxes what the elevator code requires.
Yes.
The elevator code requires you put a pump in the pit, no matter
Period.
what. And you size it at 50 GPM
Per each elevator.
for each elevator.
In
Yeah.
the desert.
Yeah, so, and we backed off on that. It's like,
Yeah, I didn't realize there was conditions where you didn't have to do an elevator pit sump pump, because I always thought of it as you could get a flood, from the inside, from a water pipe breaking or something that fills it up. And I don't think I've ever done an elevator pit without a sump pump, but I see local amendments, it is allowed.
I think maybe what you're seeing is they're putting the sump in the pit, but they're not putting the pump in it.
Yes, if we can get away with it, we just have to try some and a
Okay.
check valve sitting there that can say, someone's gonna take care of this.
It's an excellent idea to at least have provisions.
Is that a policy that's written down, what you just said? I'm not reading that in here.
The-
I just read it.
It says, the existing policy says that under the certain circumstances, you must have one, or if you don't meet those conditions, or if you're less than 4 stories and you have a dry pit, then you don't have to have one. When you get above 4 stories or you have a hydraulic, you have to have a sump. Sorry, I'm paraphrasing when I say that. There's nothing that requires provisions where you're not required to have the sump pump.
We're gonna go through this on the plumbing code, that's all. That was actually specifically noted today in our review committee was, sump pumps in an elevator pit.
So the way it works is if you've got a building that's 5 stories, or you've got some pipe pit. If it's a hydraulic elevator, it's got to go through an oil water separator. It just gets messier and messier, okay? If you got a 4-story or less building, you don't have to put the sump pump in unless you got a ground problem where you got groundwater flowing into the pit. Then you got to put a pump in to get rid of the groundwater.
What's the thought on the break and story count, why it's a difference?
I think it has to do with the fire department in an emergency situation, a fire situation, taking over the elevator and using it to evacuate people or to fight the fire, to run equipment up. So like in a really tall building where the firefighters go up a lot of stairs, they're gonna probably consider taking over the elevator and using it. But in a building 4 stories or less, they're not gonna trouble with the elevator. They're just gonna hump up and down the stairs.
And is there any discussions about how it's disposed if it's a non-hydraulic? I mean, usually the solution is just a pipe out the sidewall and
So they have pumps specifically made for this that actually sense the hydraulics, and they'll go and they'll pump until they find some hydraulics, and then you stop. That's how, at least ones that I've designed or had people I know design, that's the preferred method over the oil water separator.
That's the
Installation.
approved method.
Yeah, except there was a conflict though, that those things come with a
20-foot cord and electrical prohibits any rubber cords longer than 6 foot in the pit or hoist weight.
Did you by chance amend that?
Sir.
That's still an issue.
So the discharge can either go to the sanitary sewer system or it can go to a location outside the building. I think most people probably take it to an approved location. Because the thing's normally not gonna run unless you got the ground.
right, unless you got
Victor Fosberg arrived at 4:46, and Mr. Boney arrived at 5:50.
Portion. Or no.
Right.
It's accurate.
guess I feel
With
that
any
can
sump
be
pump?
pretty ambiguous. Qualifies.
Their attempt is to disconnect the elevator pit sump from any sewer or septic system, so that you don't have that kind of gases coming back into the elevator. All it's asking for is an air gap or a break between that discharge and any sewer or septic system. Like dumping into a janitor sink or an air brake, just so long as nothing pushes way back through.
Check valve.
Yeah.
The check valve is already required, but it also specifies the air gap.
Yeah, when you're discharging into the building sewer, you gotta do it through an air brake or an air gap, an indirect waste receptor. You can't do a direct connection. Otherwise, that becomes a potential line to get back into the
Comes a
building.
chimney.
Not to mention the sewer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did they take
Yep.
out, they were afraid of the hydraulic fluid getting in and receptor?
That's correct. Hydraulic elevator pit drainage shall pass through a oil water separator or other approved means shall be employed to prevent the discharge of hydraulic fluid.
That's still,
But most designers have moved to the ones that actually sense hydraulic fluid and stuff. You don't need to process it.
And it turns out you can use hydraulic fluid that's of a non, what was it?
It's a non-petroleum based
Yeah.
product.
They have some that, of the elevators that it basically use like a cooking oil or something.
Vegetable oil.
Yeah, and they get, when they get warm, it kind of smells good.
Sounds like cooking french
That's the
fries.
guys use out of Campbell Lake, for the hydraulic lifts on their tires. Get vegetable oil.
And if you use that style, you don't have to do the oil water separator. I did not know that either until I got to spend this time with the elevator guys.
Well, I know how well it goes for us to be able to have any say in what the elevator ends up being, so.
Yeah.
It's good to know.
Is he-
Try this guy.
Any other comments on the amendments to the elevators and escalator code?
There was a discussion that you may remember, Ms. Cowling, that one of our members brought up regarding, was it small lifts that are used, small little platform lifts for, used in garages? And he was gonna bring that before the elevator, or the electrical committee at the suggestion of the elevator committee. Because he said it really belongs in the NEC spec. And that kind of was shot down in flames, as I understand it.
Yeah.
And I'd like to hear more why. And it's my understanding that Anchorage is interpreting this different than most of the rest of the country. So, can somebody address that?
I think you're talking about an elevation of ignition source issue.
I believe that's it, yes.
Oh, yeah, we require sparking, arcing, potential ignition sources in a residential garage be 18 inches off the floor of the garage. Minimum.
And he said that basically,
There's a certain lift provider in town who the types of lifts he provides have ignition sources within 18 inches of the floor, and he doesn't want to switch to lifts that don't have.
oh, so there are other ones that are
Yeah.
Yes.
but basically
But according to him,
compliant.
they're junk. They're not as good.
Well, I don't want to get into
You're
that.
saying
Yeah.
ignition source is an electric motor that's not sealed?
Yeah.
Or contacts.
Electrical contacts.
Okay, so
And
this
there-
is,
not necessarily an interpretation that's knocking out the industry. This is an interpretation that's knocking out possibly a manufacturer.
Well, I think he even has options within his product line, if I'm not wrong, but I mean,
About 7 years ago, he replaced a single switch on one of his models that made it legal in this application. And a sealed switch was acceptable. But he does not seem to recall that one.
That addresses my question. Thank you very much.
And I do not believe Anchorage is interpreting it differently than other locations. That was his feeling, but I don't think he was correct on that.
It was actually his direct statement, but we had proof there are other locations that don't allow it.
I've lived all over the country, and every garage I've had, the water heater that is elevated 18 inches, every receptacle is elevated above the 18 inches. It's absolutely common everywhere.
Right. I concur with all that. He was just saying that these particular lifts
He
should be
didn't feel like
exempt.
his switches were, he was reading the code in a way that we couldn't get there.
My take on it when it was there a lot of the members were asking questions like, where do you get that from? And then basically it came down to, well, just pass mine and then you won't see me again. And we're like, well, that's not how it works.
That's not the way the game is played. Okay.
Okay, well, there's no other discussion on the elevator and escalator code. Thanks, Mr. Callen, Boney, and staff for rounding that up for us. For those who came in late, we were moving reverse back up the agenda, so we started with C and we are moving through B and now we are to A, so we do have Victor here. You're here.
I was at LUSAC, wrong spot, need to read the email.
I do that almost every meeting.
Do you?
Okay, discussion on the electrical code and local minutes. Can you tell me why again this is off of the rest of the kind of code? I mean, electrical seems big to just be wrapped into the rest of the code cycle of.
it's, a different entity publishes the electrical code. NFPA publishes the electrical code versus ICC publishes all the other codes except the UPC, which is published by APO. That's probably the biggest
Got it,
reason
yeah.
it's off. You know, the year's 2017 versus 2018, and yeah, I couldn't explain all the why it's that way, but.
I think you did a pretty good job.
I think the National Electric Code is probably older.
I've heard that. I heard it's the original code. It's like the oldest code.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we had a great idea, and then you guys ran off trying to bring it in.
We got way out of
And I go, why are you guys on a different code cycle?
Wanted to see what you guys did.
Yeah.
Genghis Khan had the oldest building codes. If your building fell over and harmed an individual and broke his arm, your arm was broken. Those are the oldest building codes in history.
If it killed somebody, they killed your slave.
It
is.
I like these Swiss calm.
This seems more fair.
Minus the, how many pages of code we have now. Victor, do you want to comment on this?
I can, yeah, if you'd like. I mean, we did, last time, the last amendments were 8 pages, so this ends up being 10 pages. There was a few things, we were able to delete a couple tables that were put back in the code, so we were able to keep those. There was a few things in hazardous locations that they went to a table method, so that sort of stretched our code, because we had to now alter those tables and put them into it. Other than that, we didn't add many, I think other than that, a page of more elevator codes that kept coming over, so that we put in 620, because that's the appropriate article for it. The largest things we probably did is the ground fault. We stepped back from what ground fault is required by the national code. It actually requires three-phase power to be protected. Three-phase all the way up to 100 amps to be ground fault protected. The problem when Eric and a few of us did some research, they don't make those that are ready, that you can put into a panel board. So it means, guys, we're going to have to use motor controller size units that work on like marinas and that they use in our oil fields, which are the hazardous location, very expensive type. And this would apply even to like a kitchen that Eric, so you would have had these stacked units they're already pretty crowded trying to find those spots. So even though we don't like to be less on the ground fault issue, it was one we thought, I think the board viewed that it needs to wait a little while and let the manufacturers catch up with what the requirement is. So that was probably the largest as far as from a pure safety standpoint that we went to, we need to look at this a little bit, give them a little more time.
That's correct. Yeah.
So, the other probably real big one that we did is we eased up on the Romex requirement in the structures. It used to be, if you look at 334.10.3, that used to be all other structures were deleted. So that basically meant if it's a single family dwelling or a duplex or an apartment building, those were the only things in town since the 80s that you could use Romex in. You could not use it in any other type of environment. We expanded, after much discussion and talk amongst the group, it ebbed and flowed for a while, and we came up with, if it's an R type or the I1, which like the assisted livings of wood construction, allowing those as long as they're arc faulted. And the 2017 changed things even, they're slowly increasing that. If you look at hotels where it used to just be guest rooms, the 2017 now says all the rooms in a hotel have to be arc fault protected. So on that case, we allowed for, as long as it's wood construction, that was one that the panel felt real strongly about. It used to just be the types of ratings, but they wanted to say if you're using wood framing, wood studs, then the Romex would be allowed in any of these R1 through R4s, including I1s. Sort of on the basis of these things that are used more as residential type, bedrooms, those type of rooms, that type of construction, with that additional protection of arc faults, everyone felt comfortable in allowing it. The issue really comes down to the code has had a problem for years because Romex not being equivalent to MC, that's basically what created arc faults, was Romex. Because they had a problem with breakers not tripping. The fault current on breakers, the standard for them is not set, scary enough by UL, that they weren't consistent, so that's what caused a lot of failures in your Romexes, and that's what caused arc faults to come into place. And I really think you see in the code that they're slowly pushing. Eventually, everywhere they're going to allow Romex, they're going to say you arc faulted. That's basically what we've done, except we restrict it from the national level, not into a lot of the certain other commercial environments. So it was a big change from the 40 years that the city has done, but still, since we see many more assisted living being built, even some of the hotel situations, I think the board felt comfortable with this amendment. Some of the other changes, like I said, most of the others were either a few of those additions. The other thing we did do at the very beginning, you'll notice we rolled in the definition of dorm. That is in the IBC for the most part, but we wanted to make it clear because the NEC addresses dormitories and says you must do them in a certain way, but then it didn't define it, and it left sort of a hole that we didn't want to be a loophole, so we wanted to clarify and bring that. We did add on assisted livings, clarifying that college dormitories, boarding houses, and assisted livings, those would be included in that dormitory type. So we brought that definition in, I thought, more to help the designers, but also clarify it for people. Most of the others, there was a little bit of tweaking. They were pretty much the existing. We did expand Locally, we do restrict the amount of openings on a 20 amp circuit. The board looked at it in a dwelling. So it's 6 openings on a kitchen appliance circuit and 13 was the openings on a general use circuit. And the board was comfortable with moving up to 15. It was discussion on the 6 on the counter, on the kitchen counters, but the concern with most of the guys that do that work, where we're seeing more and more specialty appliances showing up in the kitchens, your paninis, your waffle makers, and they're like, no, we've already got, they're getting loaded as they are, so they wanted to keep that, but expand the general circuits a little bit more. Is there any other, I think the one that we spent the most time on was definitely the Romex amendment. We had to do some cleanups on some where they moved some things around and removed some fitting rules, and we wanted to carry them back over. The informational notes stayed the same. And, we also, on the emergency systems, one that was a big one last time was 719, which is multi-wire branch circuits. So the way the code read or reads is if you come in and you have a shared neutral in a building on the emergency system, you can't leave it that way. Basically, once you go to touch it, that emergency system can't use a shared neutral. The reason being, in the code for a number of cycles, they've required you to handle tie, or so you would be a common trip. Well, as most of our systems are designed in most of Anchorage and around the country, you would pick up one leg to feed your emergency light, which would charge an emergency ballast. So now if you did it, with a handle tie, someone turns it off or it trips because of another circuit, now you can have a dead emergency circuit. So the code rightfully said, hey, wait, we shouldn't leave that situation. You need to address it. But they didn't give any guidance for what you would do if someone went in to remodel. And that was the problem we saw last time is now someone comes and does one office on an office building, and we say, hey, that emergency system can't stay that way. So they're gonna have to rewire. So we gave some more guidance and leaving some, okay, only if it's so many lights, if you're doing, the last one said if you did a retrofit, so if they swapped out your fluorescence to an LED with a retrofit kit, that didn't trigger the requirement. It allowed them to say, all you did is change it. More and more of the contractors are saying, well, they're not doing the retrofits as much, they're just junking the whole fixture, putting in a brand new LED fixture. So we expanded it to, if you're doing in that same spot, then that wouldn't trigger that requirement. It was really, the designers at first thought, oh, the engineer's no big deal, and then when they started thinking about the remodel work, they thought that's a nightmare. So that's why we addressed it, to give sort of a path for, even if the fire department comes in today in this building and said, I want 4 more egress spot, we have it addressed so they can say, yeah, you can do that, and that's not going to trigger that requirement that now you got to get it off as a neutral and have to rewire a major portion of the circuitry there.
I think we made it unlimited on how many emergency lights you could add, because we were limiting it to 6, and it kind of was, we'd be fighting our way through to just add 6 so we didn't trigger the requirement, which was really not making it safer. So we bumped that to unlimited, because more emergency lights is always going to be good, even no matter how the neutrals are done.
So the issue became, basically, once you reconfigure your lighting layout is what's going to trigger, you have to fix it, which typically that's when someone's going to start doing more rewiring. They're not going to try and use the existing whips. They're starting to rip apart. So that's when they should make that change to be in line with the national code. But those were the majority of the largest changes. Other than that, there was just, like I said, tweaking of the main rules. Is there any others that you can?
The Romex was the only thing that stands out in my mind that we had to talk about.
Quite a few times. That changed over time from what some of the options were and what it ended up being. So.
Yeah.
How many people made up the committee?
13, I believe it's 13. So I think we had 4 engineers, 4 contractors, the 2 board members at the time, and then we had
MLP,
two of the utilities plus David, our plan reviewer, and myself and Mike as the inspectors. And then we had one that wasn't attending because she was on maternity leave, but I left her on the list. So.
Any other comments before we move on? Just have one clarifying question. Underneath the hazardous class, I've kept classified location section, where you guys define the 18 inches off the garage, private garage or public garage or whatever. But then you go into the portion of it about when you are one room off of that. The verbiage in here just talks about within the living space of a dwelling unit. Have I misinterpreted the code to say that if there's, because the mechanical code kind of says, if I had a boiler room off of a public garage, it had to be 18 inches and higher. I thought was my interpretation, and so I'm just kind of reading the verbiage here and reading through the other stuff, and I'm not really reading how it continues that elevation one room beyond the outside of dwelling units, and maybe I'm misreading that.
So you're talking about the informational note that's in there, under, where it's 510 hazardous classifications, the informational note, and then the elevation of ignition sources?
Yeah.
And that was a clarification paragraph, I think.
You know, I think I copied this verbatim out of the mechanical code.
Is it how you
Yeah.
And the reason we did that was because from the electrical side, Eric can tell you, him and I answered more often than not, we had electricians wanting to make things hazardous locations, that it was not the rules, it was the elevation of sources that was the issue. So we wanted to put that in there so that they could, you know, because they'd run off and say it's a hazardous location, and cause everyone's heads to catch on fire, and we were like, whoa, that's not, you know, that's not what it is. This is that rule. These are the basic rules behind it, and just follow that. Don't suddenly end up, you're not classifying that area class 1, div 2, or 1-1, which is going to cause them all sorts of, you know, wiring issue problems. So that's why it's more of a note rather than, you know, trying to say, hey, this is how you have to do it. It's saying, here it is, and it's, by the way, it's also,
The goal was to give access to the electricians and that don't have access to the mechanical codes, and try to help them understand this isn't class 1 division 1 or 2 areas. This is a totally separate issue. It's so similar and it sounds similar, but it's actually different.
as soon as you say 18 inches of the floor to an electrician, he
They think
goes,
it's class one.
that's a classified location.
Yeah.
and they go,
I really do like that first paragraph. It says that the mechanical code's going to require these elevations regardless of classification.
Exactly.
Nice.
Electricians believe the reason the water heater is elevated in the garage is because it's a classified location.
Yeah. They'll tell
Because
you.
it's 18 inches, it must be, that's what it is. So we were trying to help with that because I know I spend an hour or two a month just explaining that to electrician after electrician.
Or winding down an owner or a
Yes.
designer that's
Why?
all went through the roof because they're like, they're telling me I gotta do rigid conduit and seal offs and what's going on here? It's like, no, wait, time out. That's not what's going on here, so.
Great. Per agenda, that wraps up our new business and takes us into reports.
Does,
Excuse me.
Mr. Chair, I assume the proper way that we should be dealing with this is to act as approving or not approving, so that these can be moved forward to the assembly for their review and adoption. So we should be taking action on it or table, in my opinion.
Why somebody has to make a motion to.
Right, approval.
You're really good at making those motions.
Well, I was almost going to suggest that we do have 2 board members that served on the committee, and that would probably be a stronger statement. However.
This, you did it the easiest way. This will be easy. We've got to the last, so now we can.
Well, John, I'll take the heat off of you if you'd like.
Oh,
I move to accept local amendments to chapter 23.75, local amendments to the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, ASME A17.1, 2016 / CSAB 4416, safety code for elevators and escalators, and Chapter 23.76, local amendments to the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, ASME A 18.1-2017, safety standards for platform lifts and stairway chair lifts.
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Is that wrong, Ross?
No, that's good. You're correct.
We have one of the same nature on the electrical codes.
I'd make an amendment to accept the changes to the NFPA 70 NEC 2017
As amended.
as amended.
I second.
Thank you. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, John, for your correction on that.
So at some point, I'm assuming as these get ready to go forward, you'd give notification, or is there a need for having representatives there that night? Or these could be that contentious? I'm
Yeah,
thinking more about, the issue that came up about this one manufacturer on the platform. Oftentimes we'll see an appeal in front of the assembly is more effective than appealing
Yeah.
committee levels.
So we'll notify the board when the ordinance finally is ready to go before the assembly, when it's going to be heard. And typically, we probably recommend that at least the electrical representatives on the board show up to the assembly that night to answer questions. And likewise, staff's going to be there. Because, you never know who's going to come out of the woodwork and,
The elevator, he may come. He was tenacious.
Not cogent, but he was tenacious.
And the assembly is approving a massive document which they know nothing about. I think you guys felt a little bit of that tonight. So it helps to show support for it.
Half emergency text. Okay, so that concludes new business. Does anybody else has to correct? Did you correct? Okay, we'll move to reports, so.
Reports, things are kind of slow with the old building department. We're just a shade under 90% of where we were last year at this point, with, a month and a half to go in the year. And hoping that we've hit rock bottom, and hoping the economic indicators and the positive outlook for the oil industry, although things have kind of like tanked a little bit in the last week or two, but the things are going to be on the upslide. I'm sure you guys all saw the article in the paper about 2 weeks ago that said the oil industry is looking to add 10,000 jobs over the next 2 years. So, if that were to happen, things would really start to turn around, I think. But
Oil taxes must be up in the legislature for a vote.
is that what's going on? Yeah. Obviously, others in the world are much more in control of the price of a barrel of oil than we are, so. Ross?
I know you're starting reviews of model codes. Is that all the other disciplines, all the IECC's codes are under review, or not all of them?
Yes, so all of them except for, I'm doing something different with the energy code this year. The last few times we've taken the codes to the assembly, everything's gone pretty smoothly except the energy code. And so I've parceled it out. I'm going to task the IRC committee with reviewing the residential, single-family portion of the energy code. And it works pretty well that way because Chapter 11 of the IRC is the residential portion of the energy code, the IECC. They just reprint it in the IRC out of convenience. And then I was going to task the IBC non-structural committee with looking at the commercial envelope compliance. And as far as the electrical stuff goes, we'll probably convene maybe a subcommittee of electrical contractors and engineers to look at, the lighting controls and lighting design. And what little mechanical there is could probably be dealt with by the IMC committee.
Are we gonna try to do that before the end of this year?
So I'm thinking, usually it takes us about 4 months to get through the code committee work for the I-codes.
So this is more negative.
Yeah, so, our goal is to be done by April, that time when we're all really kind of starting to get busy on the plan review side anyway. Likewise, most likely on the design side.
That was the last one to get reviewed, isn't it? The energy codes?
Oh, yeah, so it's Chapter 11 in the IRC, it's the last chapter, so I'm anticipating that.
That's on the list of stuff to go over. I think we had it last.
Yeah.
Because you saved the best for last, right?
There you go. And it'll be interesting because I think there's really going to be a diverse opinion as to where we should go with the.
Oh, it's going to be exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not so much so on the commercial side.
Yeah.
Any other questions about the code adoption process?
Do you happen to know what the state's schedule is, if they're looking at 18 yet?
I have not heard anything from the state fire marshal's office. And I get emails from them like about once a week. And I haven't seen anything from them on reviewing the 2018 codes. I know AHFC is currently looking at the 2018 IRC and IECC for what they do. But the state fire marshal's office is not, I haven't seen anything yet. The state of Alaska Department of Labor has already adopted the 2017 NEC, and they've already adopted these updated elevator codes. And they've also adopted the 2018 UPC, I believe. I could be wrong on that, but I thought they have.
Well, the NEC definitely.
The NEC for certain.
But they don't review plans or come and inspect, so I don't really.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I ask a dumb question? What's the Department of Labor doing adopting codes?
Boy, that's a question, yeah. I have no idea why the codes at the state level has been split out that way.
Wow.
I was told years ago that the reasoning was that they wanted to keep track of projects and make sure, and I'll be bold here, union levels were represented, and this is early on. In terms of protecting work within the Department of Labor.
That was back in the Department of Big Labor.
Yeah.
Do we have a report from Victor? No, I think just Ross gives the reports.
Ross starts it and then flips through.
Reports? Where's your 3-page analysis of?
The elevators, we've seen 30 new elevators in this last year, which puts us about the same as the 40-year average.
And what do you have, about 1,400 elevators in Anchorage that you?
1,402
1,402 elevators that get inspected every?
conveyances
Every 2 years?
every 2 years, except escalators and moving walks, which we look at every year.
Of the 40, is approximately how many are residential versus?
Those are all commercial
All
units.
commercial.
There's about a ton of little hotels pop up all over. You probably did a few of them.
They have elevators. All I know is we did build a straight shaft.
Make it straight.
Make it straight.
And then they also, when they do a modernization, that's a pretty intensive for the elevators. So it requires a lot of work.
Victor?
I mean, we definitely see some sort of uptick in the last few weeks, just from an inspection side, so I don't know exactly what the reason is, but traditionally, we always get a bump when a hard freeze hits, you know, we get that scare. And then you get a bit of people trying to close at the end, but I don't know what was going on in the last 2 or 3 weeks. We definitely, for electrical bump, and then the more we're talking to guys, they're saying, oh, I'm bidding this, so I don't know for a fact, but we're keeping busy. We will have one guy leave, Dale will be leaving sooner or later, so we'll look into that once he finally gives us a date, but he's been chomping at the bit. So, but yeah, that's, you know, we definitely see an increase. I would say right now is busier than we actually were in the fall of this year, which is surprising to me. Normally that's our busier time period for electrical inspections. And since it was mentioned, this is good to have this moving forward because we've been out of whack with the Department of Labor for their NEC adoption and getting some questions on what do I do, how do I, you know, if the state's like that. And state's good, they're just say, yeah, you guys are doing your process, but I've had different designers asking, so what are ours? Well, you just pick what you're gonna do. But, so it's nice to move forward with that so we can get it to the assembly.
Boy, lively bunch here. Just keep going.
Well, we are trying to, I guess on a side note, more and more solar, which I know you were involved with some of the projects you had. The city is really trying to encourage some of that, but we're also trying to wrap our hands around a few of these guys that are not really qualified in selling people products and try and come up with a little more streamlined process for people, you know, for individuals, but also for the contractors to understand, because it's, you know, they're not a super complex. They come as a package unit, but we get a lot of contractors that want to do it, but they're not qualified as the state considers. So that's a balancing act for us. So getting with the state saying, so are they legal to do this? Well, no. Okay, so what are they legal to do? And you know, that's where we've had to sort of say, give us a definitive line. But meshing that with the code can be a little difficult when we're trying to get people all on the same page.
And so you said you're working on a summary of that, or?
Well, the city is actually encouraging to try and have a handout that will eventually come out to help. I think it's aimed more at homeowners, isn't it, Ross, than it is, but it can be open to anyone. I mean, basically to use that method. But at the same time, we're also working with the utilities, because that's where people need to go first, and try and work with the utilities to basically get a one sheet with a simple summary of a lot of things we from the electrical department need, but that they want to see, that then they would bring that over to us, to the city when they get their permit, eliminate a lot of the problems, because we get a lot of homeowners or a lot of these contractors loosely calling themselves solar contractors, and it's, you know, by the stage we see it, it's not like the roughing in a building. It's, they've already mounted everything, it's already done, and it's very wrong. So it's like you're trying to maneuver that back to, this is what you need to do to comply. I mean, literally some units that just aren't legal anymore, and it's like you're not going to really be able to fix that the way it is. So we're hoping to get a little more information to people, but also work with the utilities so that everyone's in that same loop, whether it's commercial jobs or even on the residences.
Has there been any discussion about implementing the ICC solar code?
I haven't heard.
I never heard of that.
Didn't know they had one. So,
International solar energy provisions. That's about all I know about it.
I'll have to look into it, because it might be what the electrical used to be. You know, they had one and then it shrank to like 3 paragraphs and said, go see the NEC. You know,
Yeah, I bet you it more just says refer to NEC if you go search that out. We don't let other people do work with electrical. It's not right.
Well, they'll send us what's the ICC energy code? They won't send you to any, so there, wait.
Well, that's the problem, is they kind of, with the ICC, they've kind of gotten into our world, and that's part of it. It's irritating. You know, I don't really like it.
They seem to be in the business of selling books. They've got a zoning code, they've got a green construction code. They're coming out with the code every other year.
Yeah. Yeah. Handbooks, videos.
Yep.
Somebody's making some money, and it's a bit frustrating. We should just stick to the National Electrical Code. Let us handle it and trust us.
Trust your computer.
And we should go to a 6-year growth cycle.
Comments from the board?
I just thought that was pretty good, how you guys worked together on that art fault.
Oh, for the.
Yeah, it's kind of refreshing to know that from your side, you're saying, hey, it's not practical. Let's try to get rid of this for now and work it in when we can find this stuff.
For the GFCI or the ARC fault? Both of them?
Both.
Oh, yeah. Well,
I brought it up, and I thought I'm going to get shot down so
No,
fast.
I thought that was cool.
And I brought them the information where, and I think you guys checked as well. And the manufacturers were going, yeah, we can't really do that. We got this other thing we can do, and it's like really ugly type thing. We're working on stuff.
and then you want to ask them, well, didn't you put that in? And
Yeah,
they're like,
you know they lobbied to get it in there, plus sell equipment. It was somebody at Square D, Cutler Hammer, or Siemens that put that in there.
Well, it's just nice to know. I mean, that's a shining example of why people are here doing this type of work, and it's, anyway, it's refreshing.
Well, and from the Romex side of it, the ARC faults is as much as those get a bad name a lot of times, that is the reason why most people felt comfortable with, protecting that Romex, letting it do it because of its shortcomings. But with ARC fault, that technology, hopefully, and as they keep getting better and better at it, it is actually a safer method. So I do honestly think they're going to just expand that through the code, and hopefully we won't get all the frustrations that guys still have, but it is a safer method. So it's a big advancement from the old thermal magnetic breakers, there's no question.
Most fires are started from arc faults, and the normal breakers can't sense an arc fault.
Right. Well, they'll let them arc at 20 amps.
Yeah.
Hey, it's a 20 amp breaker. It says, I don't care, that's a load. And just let it cook it until it burns down, whereas the fault current will, and not only is it doing the wiring system we're doing, the type we're putting in now, we're actually checking that, that cord. If someone pinches that cord underneath their, dresser or underneath their couch and it shorts, that should interrupt it and limit that time that arc's involved. And it really is a better technology, as much as a lot of people want to complain or they do remodels and have to fight about it. I think the evidence is going to show. So that's why, because of what we saw and where they were going with it, and where they seem to be, in a way, going with the code slowly, like we're going to protect all the Romex with this arc fault eventually, we were comfortable with making that change. And still, we know there's a need locally for the, we see the assisted livings and those types of, boarding house type of dwellings. And if they're being used like a residence, why can't we use the same protection and do the same thing? That was the focus, I think, or the way we looked at it.
I think you were actually pressuring us to accept more Romex too. I think that came from you.
What do you say, pressure? I don't think.
Light pressure.
Well, we had a conundrum with our local amendment. Like, what happens if a change of use takes place where the building's wired with Romex?
Mhm.
And it used to be an R2 apartment house, and now they want to go to an assisted living. And now we're in this quandary. You could conservatively interpret the code saying you got to rewire the building. Right. Or you could liberally interpret the code saying, no, we'll accept it as is. And we were all arguing about it.
And I think that
Lively discussions.
Yeah. I think it cleaned it up.
Yeah, good. All right.
Does someone need to make a motion to
Adjourn.
Move to adjourn?
I say.
All in favor of adjourning?
insect stuff.